I wonder when you listen to the story of Joseph read again, whether you notice anything. I'll share some of the things that I noticed. And it's really interesting to see the way that this passage connects with other parts of the Bible. The first thing that jumps out at me is Shechem. Last month we were talking about the rape of Dinah. And who was Dinah's rapist? Was Shechem, the man after whom this area is named. And it becomes a significant place for the children of Israel. Prior to the story we read last month, Jacob actually buys a plot of land in Shechem for family burials. Joseph himself is said to be buried with his father in Shechem. So there's this continuing connection for the family in that place. But then, of course, the brothers have moved on to a different town. They've moved on to Dothan. And that is where they then capture Joseph and they cast him into the pit. Does anybody know any other stories about the town of Dothan? I couldn't think of one at first, but it's where Elisha shows to his servant the invisible armies of the Lord. The prophet is surrounded by this foreign army, and his servant is terrified, and he opens his eyes. And I think the statement is, those who are with us are more than those who are against us. So it's interesting to note these connections. Another thing I note about this passage, this chapter, is similar to the one we looked at last month, Genesis chapter 34. God does not speak, God is not said to act, and God is not spoken about in this chapter at all. And yesterday I sat and did a quick survey of the second half of the book of Genesis. And it's really interesting to note how few times God actually speaks in the second part of the book of Genesis. God is said to speak in chapter 35. And then he speaks again in a dream to Jacob in chapter 46. But between those two chapters, the Lord does not say a thing. However, he is said to act, and he is spoken about. And there's often reference of the Lord being with Joseph. These are the way the Lord is referred to. But he doesn't speak in this chapter. He's not said to act, and he's not even spoken about. And I think that gives us a flavour of what we're actually dealing with here in this story. And then, of course, there's the pit into which Joseph is cast. And I wonder if you can think about any other biblical characters who are said to be cast into a pit. Daniel. Yes, Daniel is one. Although Daniel's pit's a different pit. It's a lion's den, whereas the pit into which Joseph is cast is an empty well. But yes, very definitely Daniel. Anybody think of any others? Jeremiah is cast into the pit. And of course we read Psalm 40. King David reflects on the experience of the pit, although he's never said to be cast into it. I suppose you could think of that as metaphorical. What does it mean to be cast into the pit? And I think particularly of Jeremiah. Jeremiah brings a message to the people that they do not want to hear, and so they cast him away. Daniel's the same. He brings a message that people do not want to hear. And this really is a picture of divine truth coming into a self-serving world, isn't it? When divine truth comes in and makes a statement or makes a claim that we do not want to hear, we don't celebrate it, we throw it away. And this is what I see as happening here. Now, of course, there is the well-established connection between the person of Joseph and the person of Jesus. There are many parallels between the two lives that are widely acknowledged. And of course, you know, the Lord was cast away in the same manner. And so we look at the brothers doing what they did to Joseph, and we see that they couldn't tolerate the light that he brings into their lives. They certainly were not happy with his dreams, and so they cast him away into the darkness. But one of the things I note as we read a story like this, and indeed many stories in the Bible, or even watching films or television programs, isn't it so easy for us to relate to the hero of the story? We imagine ourselves occupying the same shoes as the hero. And we set up a kind of an us and a them scenario in our minds as we read these stories. So we put ourselves in the shoes of Joseph. We imagine ourselves being cast into the pit, but we don't relate to the brothers in the same way. Of course, when we talk about the teachings of the church and how we look at this, we don't look at it in that interpersonal way, as in we are a character in the story and those other characters are other people who intend us evil. In our church, we talk about it in an intrapersonal way. So Joseph and the brothers all represent something which is within us. And so how can we understand this story in those terms? Well, we might think about our dreams and goals in life and the way our old habits will tend to squash those and press them down. We might think about questions that arise in our minds and the way that our assumptions about life tend to squash them down and throw them away, or indeed even intuitions about life. We might have a spark of an idea which we think, oh no, that's ridiculous, and cast it aside without any further thought. And I wonder whether that particular tendency we have within our own lives is what then influences the way we speak to and deal with other people. Does the intrapersonal stuff dictate the way we deal with the interpersonal? Is there a connection there? So my relationship with the dreamer within, does that determine my relationship with the dreamer in you? And then as I was reading the story, the other thing that I recalled was Jesus speaks about the pit as well. And he answered the lawyers and the Pharisees, saying, "Which of you, having a donkey or an ox that has fallen into a pit, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day?" This is a story of Jesus who is presented with a man who needs healing on a Sabbath. In Luke's Gospel, he's in the Pharisees' house. And they're bringing him, I think, to test the Lord. Will he break the Sabbath by conducting this healing? And the Lord makes this comment. What's the difference between casting Joseph into the pit or rescuing your donkey or your ox from it? And I wonder if they aren't two sides of the same coin. That in rescuing our own reasoning and our own thinking from difficulties, we tend to cast away what is divine. So we see that we hold on to and we rescue that which is dear to us, but the divine truths, the challenging ones, are the ones that we tend to ignore, push away, discard. And I see that in a couple of ways. On Thursday we were talking about angels, and we were talking about the way that in common language, if someone is good to you, we say, "Oh, aren't you an angel?" The recognition that there's something angelic about individual people. Whereas if many people think from traditional church doctrine, we reject the idea that angels might be human beings, because the doctrine has taught something entirely different. We see the same thing in Jesus' ministry. Who were the people who accepted the Lord and who were the people who rejected him? He was rejected by the religious leaders. He was accepted by those people who were outside the church, the outcasts, the sinners, the ordinary day-to-day folk. They were the people who responded to the Lord. And I think there's a connection there between that and the Lord's ministry and Joseph, because where does Joseph end up? After he's cast into the pit, he finds himself in Egypt. in the natural world. So I'm just going to ask you to ponder this story over the next week. Just consider the way that we can accept the Lord, but we can also have a tendency to reject his call and reject those awkward questions or awkward intuitions or awkward insights that challenge us. Perhaps we ought to think more carefully about some of the things that come our way. Are they real? Are they realistic? Is their Lord actually trying to speak to us through them, rather than necessarily casting them away out of hand?